Narayan, welcome to SpeakEasy with Dheeraj Sinha. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Dheeraj. It's lovely to be here. I've heard one episode of Speakeasy when it started off, and I was making a mental note to myself saying that at some point in time, I'd love to speak to Dheeraj in this format. So, really delighted to be here.
Awesome. Looking forward to this conversation. So, staying with the format of this conversation, Narayan, I'll cut straight to the chase, right? And at the risk of dating ourselves a bit, right? Both you and I have spent a lot of time in the business, growing through the marketing process, building, say, what we call the traditional legacy brands, right? I mean, you've spent a lot of time building Cadbury as a brand in the country, and so on and so forth. And now, as things are changing in the new internet age economy, brands are coming; they're becoming bigger and bigger, and there's something as called as modern strategy or modern marketing, so to say, for lack of any better articulation, which is coming into play, and a lot of fundamentals seem to be up for questioning. Now, jury's still out on that, whether that's the right way to do or something else is the right way to do. So I want to understand, for example, things like optimizing for attention, right? I mean, in today's times, the first thing that you're looking at when you're doing a piece of communication, is it cutting through? Even before you're looking at brand guidelines or the core of the brand and so on and so forth. So where is your mind as a seasoned marketer, business person? Where are you on that axis of where the change is, what is changing, and what should not be changing, rightfully so?
So, yeah, great question, Dheeraj. It's something that one thinks of often, and nowadays, when one sees all the advertising on, say, IPL, one begins to wonder about these things, right? But then I'm reminded of what they say in the in the comedy world, that there are no new jokes, there are only new audiences.
Yeah.
I actually believe that a lot of what, for example, you said that you need to optimize for attention, cut through, etc. These are pretty much the rules that governed, say, communication activity or advertising activity in the past as well. I just think that possibly the nature of the audience has changed. Certainly, the stimulus and the stimuli that a customer is living in. Earlier I used to say what they're exposed to, but I think now we have a reality where people are literally living with stimulus coming at them constantly. So I
Yeah.
think then you need to modify some of the tactics, if you call it, to catch attention. But back 20 years ago as well, when say there was piece of advertising to be done, which a piece of advertising is actually the sort of a tip of the spear of all your marketing sort of thought, how you want to influence behavior, what your strategic intent is, etc. When you were designing that, I mean, one of the key things that one used to judge and evaluate is this going to cut through or not? Obviously, the cut through was through a certain medium. At that point in time, it would have been TV. Nowadays, it is digital. Nowadays, it is, the media keeps sort of changing. But if I reflect back, I think the need to cut through has always been there. Now, how much you need to cut through may have changed. But as I said,
Yeah.
there are no new jokes, only new audiences,
Are
is
there?
one way of looking at it.
Yeah, I'm going to push you a bit on that. So, are there any axioms in your mind that you've been forced to challenge in last one decade, where you've thought that is was this always the right way to do, or are there any new additions in terms of axioms in last? Also, because you've also transitioned from, say, very FMCG marketing world to a very product-led automotive space. In last, say, a decade, would you have yourself challenged something which you held very, very strongly before this?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the you can call it a challenge, but it's also personally quite energizing. Is that the you can't be sitting on old axioms or this is the way it's done, and that's been constantly happening as I've moved across categories. There is, for example, you said FMCG, right? I spent a long time in the food and
Yeah.
impulse food studying across many categories. Now, I mean, it's called fast moving for a certain reason, right?
Yeah.
But then I transitioned to a category like media and entertainment, where I mean it's even faster because essentially what you are fighting for is time, is fighting for attention. I think the Netflix guy Reed Hastings said, my competition is sleep. He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And the beauty in that category is that actually the value of your decision of any action is very finite. Something needs to happen for a show that's going on air at say 8:30 in the evening, and then its value falls dramatically because वो बासी हो जाता है, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to show the value of an old show like a value of an old vehicle sort of depreciates. So your decision making cycle, your entire thinking time, etc., compresses quite dramatically. So that was one. So you have to rethink a lot of things. So, for example, a lot of the FMCG construct is about research, validation. There isn't a time for that when you are working in an industry which has such compressed timelines. And then you sort of move to current times where I think things have just sort of become even more volatile and uncertain. So, whatever you need to do is actually getting compressed. You need to do it over a much, much shorter period of time. Your planning horizons are much shorter because who knows? I work in, currently in the broader mobility space. And one of the things that's happened in the last 2 years is that as a result of all the lockdowns, and mobility gets cut down. If mobility gets cut down, the relevance for auto category itself is not there. So whatever activity you need to do, you need to compress it even further, and you need to have one eye out saying, ki, okay, when is this to be done by, or when is the gate going to close, so to say. Now, yes, I understand that it's not going. This is not the way it's going to be, but you sort of have your actions start to get dictated by that.
One of the
Yeah.
things you're talking about is the idea of speed, right, and agility. And you're
Yes.
saying being able to, whether it may not be 100% there, but being able to move it in quickly is as important as
Correct.
getting it 100% right. And staying on that thought, Narayan, a lot of conversation around data, AI, ML, and now metaverse, NFT. Brands are jumping the gun, trying to be part of the bandwagon. At the same time, there are enough legitimate businesses such as gaming. We have a client in the space of health who's legitimately foraying into metaverse in a genuine way. So there are all kinds of activities happening right now. What's your view from a business builder and a marketing perspective on some of these aspects of marketing?
So I think the way I think about this is that one needs to do a check how much of this is relevant for your customer in your category. I think you need to be reasonably sure, and I'm not saying you need to reach 100% saturation. It's not that all customers need to be on this medium, therefore it makes sense for me. Even if a small fraction and they are the sort of cutting edge or the early adopters, whatever you call it, you have to first sort of judge it for that. But the biggest thing is it relevant? I think if something's a fad, then at a time when we are looking at a lot of uncertainty, there is only a certain finite amount of money that is there to do all the activities. So you've got to be very clear as to how much you're going to allocate to what, and what is going to be your, in the traditional sense, what's going to be your reach driver, what's going to build frequency, and maybe what is going to be what you need to do in order to capture a higher share of engagement. There are some things that a customer is going to be, or consumers in general are going to be more interested in, and that, for example, could be metaverse for now. So if you can, I think you should experiment and have a very strong antenna to learn from it, and actually walk away if it doesn't make sense. And I'll sort of elaborate a little bit on that, because there's a lot of data that's out there, and the way the analogy that I'd like to use is, whenever you go in to do any transaction nowadays which involves financial, there's something called the know your customer, right?
Yeah.
Which is some of the basics, what's your age, this, that, your identity, etc., etc. So that's sort of basic. But actually, as a marketer, what I mean, and there are lots of what I would call breadcrumbs that a customer is leaving behind, right? But actually, what's of interest to me is if I can figure out from that data, um, what's the motivation for my customer, right? And I sometimes, and not sometimes, I actually feel that's the toughest thing to sort of glean or take out. And I'd love it if somebody could demonstrate, whether it is by artificial intelligence, machine learning, or human intelligence, some way to use that data to tell me these are the motivations.
Yeah.
And that's the part which I think it's elusive. And to that extent, that's always been the challenge. And it's very contextual. I mean, in an age of, say, in the 1980s, when there was, say, one channel called Doordarshan, my parents or my parents' generation would have said, "Oh, हमारे ज़माने में तो, we used to have All India Radio. Now there is so much television to watch. So there is abundance, right? And that keeps changing. That moved to, 12 channels. Then it moved to satellite television, 300 channels. Now it's internet where, you have all kinds of content. So the abundance keeps on increasing. But the challenge to figure out data to understand motivations, which is actually what a marketing function needs to do, it remains as good or as bad, I feel.
Yeah. No, you get me thinking on that, Narayan, because I think what I hear you say is that there's too much obsession of what we are doing versus what people are actually going to get off it, or what are they going to make of it. So, I mean, as business people or marketers, we can get excited about so many things. But you're saying that please ask the question, what is your customer or your end user going to make of it? Or are they excited about it as excited as you are about it? And
That's right. And I
yeah,
would just add one more thing. And again, again, it depends on what your category is about, right?
yeah,
There is, and we all know that now there's this funnel, and people become aware, and then they get closer and closer to purchase. Now, the breadcrumbs at the bottom of the funnel, when somebody is making up their mind, I think there is a lot of play for data and understanding signals, and then doing something to tip that person over. You made
yeah,
up your mind, but it's a question of am I going to make the purchase or not? I mean, what is going to tilt me over the fence? I think it's very important. But that's just one part of marketing. I mean,
yeah,
marketing can't only be about, okay, I wait for customers to come at in a supermarket at the billing desk and I keep pushing them.
yeah,
You need to do something to attract them to
yeah,
your aisle. You need to, do something to say, prefer me,
yeah,
right? Now, all of that is top of the funnel, right? Now, how
yeah,
much of data is there, and there I think the fundamental questions around motivation and
yeah,
understanding motivation and insights is very important. How
yeah,
much of data supports that is always the challenge, I feel.
yeah, sure, sure, sure. And segueing into your current business and category, Narayan, right? I mean, I was talking to Rajesh Jejurikar, who heads auto and some other parts at Mahindra and Mahindra, and he was very categorical. And though Rajesh has grown from a marketing function to a business leader function, and he said that in auto, Dheeraj, all that matters is the product, right? So that's the provocative end of this conversation. But where's your mind on what works in this category, right? In the two-wheelers category that you're running, what works really there, and what's the combination between product and marketing, or should marketing be actually embedded in the product, like we tried to do in, say, case of Bajaj V, where the idea was embedded in the product? Do we need more of that? What's going on in your mind with respect to this category?
Yeah, I think this category, and if I pull back, I think that would be true for most categories, that ultimately the brand exists because of the product or the service. If your product is relevant, it's very good, it serves a purpose, it's really high quality, then I think you're in the game, right?
Yeah,
Then it becomes a question of how are you differentiated. It comes of how do you grab attention, how do you call it whatever how are you going to make the person put money on the table, etc., etc. That comes later on. But fundamentally, if you got a pig, it doesn't matter how much lipstick you put on it. I don't think it's going to matter beyond a certain point of time. So I
Yeah.
mean, just at a very conceptual level,
Yeah.
that is my sort of takeaway after so many years. So I completely agree with what Rajesh said. I think, and in auto, product is very, very important. In fact, if I draw, the Venn diagram, and if listeners can just stay with me a little bit, in a lot of categories, you'll draw one circle and you'll draw a much larger circle outside and say the smaller circle is your product, but there are a lot of emotions attached to it and a lot of other things attached to it, and then you come to this bigger circle called the brand. I think that gap between the two circles in auto is rather narrow. In some cases, it's large, but not by much. So, I mean, first of all, I think the product needs to resonate. The product needs to, serve the purpose for which people are ultimately going to buy it. So it's very intertwined. So I think that's the first. I mean, complete agreement with what is being said. That product and brand here has to be very, very closely put. Now the second part about can you embed it? I think yes, you can, and you should, because it is becoming an age. The product has to tell a story in some manner, and
Yeah.
that's part of it becoming a brand, right? A brand ultimately is the story that you tell to customers, and that story or the theme of that story remains everlasting. It remains favored. Many things you can cut it whatever way. So if you take it from that perspective, that metaphor, then what is the story your brand is saying above its functionality of getting people from A to B in a certain manner? So yes, I think Bajaj V was an outstanding example where the product had a story within it. No, it was not just a 150cc motorcycle that was tough and reliable. It had a piece of national pride in it, and yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, so I think it's great for marketing.
Yeah, and even if you look at other examples of what's trending right now for some other reasons, but see the way Tesla has been built, uh, right? I mean, and I have had a friend call me from Canada and said that we're looking at Audi e-tron and looks very cool and sexy and luxurious, and we're looking at a Tesla Y model, and it looks like really scanty. I mean, there's no luxury inside, right? But there's a computer inside, and it looks cool. And what should we go for? And we thought a bit. It has to be Tesla. I mean, and you think about it, it's just how the whole narrative's been built, right? You're jettisoning a very traditional automaker with all the luxuries and yet electric, and choosing a brand which has been built on very, very different values. But as we were discussing, marketing is rather embedded in the product or the company in this case.
That's right. I think there's another. I totally agree with you. I think in the case of Tesla, there is a larger narrative that has successfully been built over time. I think that's the other part
Yeah,
that a lot
yeah,
of people miss out on. That all this has happened over what? I mean, at least 10 years or more.
yeah,
It's taken that much time for it to gather momentum, and we've reached this point. I think that's one. I think the second observation I have on, for example, your friend wanting to choose between, say, an Audi and this, is what I call the dominant operating system in your life, right? So, if you look at it, the amount of time that we spend in on screens is one way to look at it, but also with, say, a smartphone, which is, in a sense,
yeah,
got an OS in it, right? Now, I feel if you're going to spend 4 or 5 hours every day on something, it becomes part of you, right? So therefore, a vehicle which has, you use the term, right? It's got a computer inside it. Now,
yeah,
we are constantly using stuff, we are constantly in the presence of a computer, right? So maybe that's what actually is the motivation behind preference for a Tesla, because it's so connected, and we are
yeah,
finding some of this ring true even in the two-wheeler category,
yeah,
where people are saying, hey, connectivity is important. Now, if you think of it in very rational ways, you're riding a bike, right? Um, how much connectivity do you really require? Because it requires, your attention to ride a bike. There are things around the road, etc., etc. How much connectivity did you want? Uh, the evidence may be that people aren't, using a lot of that computing power, but I think they want it almost like a security blanket. So maybe that's the way it operates. That you need to have connectivity is now becoming table stakes in some manner.
And in that context, and how should I hate to call it, but legacy brands or brands which have constantly evolved, such as Bajaj, right? Because Bajaj always changed itself, moved with the times, right? And it's been an evolving brand, but also has a huge positive legacy, so to say, on its back. How should these brands think of themselves in today's times? What are the shifts that you are seeing that consumers are forcing us to adapt in product, in design, in marketing?
Yeah, it's a great thing to think about. And first of all, this legacy company, I think, is almost sounds like a pejorative, but actually,
Yeah.
it's actually a great strength because
Yeah.
in the case of Bajaj, certainly, Bajaj, if you look back, is a 75-year-old company that has faced a lot of disruption. Now, the disruption may be of various kinds, and I think memory is short, but there was at a time when India was very closed, and then it became open. So that is a disruption. Suddenly, you
Yeah.
have the disruption of competition. So we weathered that. And, it's well documented how that was weathered and how we got on top of it. Then came the transition from scooters, where the ICE scooters, where Bajaj had a leading share. And then there was disruption by something called a motorcycle. And the company did something about it. We've sort of transformed ourselves, and to become the third largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. So if one just pulls back, one of the values or one of the enduring, whatever you call it, the facets or the attribute of Bajaj as a brand has been to overcome a lot of these disruptions very confidently, find a solution to it, and actually be very future oriented. So if you see it from that point of view, its ability to face any kind of disruption is there's a lot of confidence. Let me put it that way. I think the customer also has a lot of confidence because they've seen this brand in some manner take these challenges in their stride and do something about it. So the electric is the electric disruption or the change or transformation is now what the automotive industry is facing. And we brought back the Chetak, which
Yeah.
was an ICE, model, and it had been discontinued, I think, back in 2005. So almost after 15 years, we brought it back in an electric avatar. So the Chetak electric two-wheeler, and the reception for it, I must say, was brilliant in the sense that it got showered with the same love, affection. People, accepted it. They look forward to it. It was in the consideration set, and I think the Chetak legacy, as in quotes, if you can say, it didn't hurt at all. We could have chosen, and I think there was a lot of debate as to, should we call it Chetak? It's a new technology. Should you call it something else? But when you sat back and looked at where the brand and the company came from, I think there were a lot of advantages and there were a lot of benefits to go with Chetak, and it's actually panned out very, very well.
So staying with the thought of EVs, right? I mean, that's the flair of the season. I mean, everybody's talking about electric, and there's a lot of action happening in two wheelers category as well, and some other categories that you are part of in terms of commercial, etc. What do you think is this going to pan out as? I mean, like every other change in India, is this going to be and not or do you think in this case we will see a much more dramatic shift towards a huge and larger share, and the platforms will shift much more dramatically than what we've ever seen before?
Um, hmm, uh, yeah, tough question to See, predicting what's going to happen in the future is always
Yeah.
very difficult, and it's fraught with a lot of risk. But so I think we're in for some very interesting times. Here's the way I look at it. If you look at the automotive space, there are sort of various categories. I think that so first of all, the move to electric is another fuel type. One can see it from
Yeah.
that perspective, right?
Or is it?
Or is it? That's the real dilemma. Now,
Yeah.
I think if you look at it, and I think in a lot of categories within automotive, it will possibly play out as another fuel type, given the use cases and given what people will use it for. Again, there are the entire ecosystem has to fall into place. I personally tend to think it is a lot of customers will see it as a fuel type because a charge is essentially refueling, right? What you're doing is refueling.
Yeah.
So until I have the confidence that, for example, I want to take a road trip from Bombay to Chennai, right? And I do it very often. Then, am I able to refuel my car? First of all, is my vehicle got the charge to go from Mumbai to Chennai at one shot? It's possible. You could theoretically think of having something where the range is so vast, right? But I don't think that exists at the moment. So
Yeah.
then you say, okay, how often can I refuel? Now, refuel in this case means charging point. So until that comes up, this use case is sort of negated, right? So if you actually shuffle through this entire thing, I think a lot needs to fall into place for the electric vehicles to become an or option. Let me put it that way. However, it is quite possible that in some subcategories, like say fleet, or as I call fleet, or more commercial applications, where the distances can be more finitely defined, and therefore you're able to program your fuel stops in a certain way. I think the transition could sort of happen faster.
Yeah.
And of course, the last point is the economics of it, right? Will the cost structures of putting up this entire ecosystem, will that be affordable by everybody, right? As a system, right? So I think all of these, I'm giving a very complex answer, but if you had to ask me to predict, I'm betting on it's an and not an or. And the reason I say that ultimately is, let's just pull back again to when the internal combustion engine driven models were the disruptor, right? People were using horse carriages uh,
Yeah.
to transport themselves, right? In the US, I think, right? Along came, and in fact, everything was sort of attuned or made for that. You had cobblestones and blah, blah, blah. There are all these things about how people had to clean up because, horse dung
Yeah.
used to be on the streets and all of that. That became a big problem, the smell, it was very untidy and all of that. But ultimately, I think the ice became the norm because it offered such superiority over the horse carriage in terms of speed, comfort, surety, etc., etc. There was such a vast difference that
Yeah.
it just didn't make sense to use that. Now the question to ask is that the case with ICE to electric? In a lot of, I possibly think not. And therefore, I think it's going to be an and not an or ultimately. It's quite possible that some people will say, okay, I need one vehicle or I need a vehicle which for long distance where I need fuel certainty and range certainty, and that is going to be a fossil fuel. Whereas shorter trips where I'm you know got more certainty and definition over refueling, that could go electric, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it, right? I mean, and rather than or. And what you're also saying is that the infra has some time to catch up, and unless that catches up, people won't have mental surety.
Yeah. So again, another example, and you know, a lot of your listeners may be interested to know that in 1998, for example, in NCR in Delhi, the Supreme Court said that you cannot run diesel taxis anymore, and they need to be CNGs, right? I don't know whether you were in NCR at that time, Dheeraj, or
Yeah, somewhere around.
somewhere around that. So it was quite interesting because what happened is that there were precisely 3 or 4 refueling pumps for CNG, right? And overnight, and again, this pollution business was I think a big problem. So what happened there was a mad scramble in the sense that you have only 4 pumps. Now it took some time for the refueling to become ubiquitous. Until then, there used to be like these huge lines. There used to be maramari. There weren't taxis available. The taxi fellows were cribbing because you're spending half your or more than half your day in just refueling. Then when are you going to earn? So I think large part of the ecosystem needs to fall into place,
Yeah.
and that will take time and investment. So I think infrastructure, investment, and technology evolution itself
Yeah.
will be the things to look out for.
Yeah, and that gets me to the other question, which I'm fairly obsessed about nowadays, is the idea of collaboration, right? I mean, classically, business, marketing theory, brand thinking, it's all been born about differentiation. How am I different from my competition, right? I mean, there have been cola wars and so on and so forth, and we've taken a lot of joy in enmity and differentiation and standing apart. But there are also examples such as Android as a platform, right, which is built on collaboration, on pushing. Or if you look at the whole idea of blockchain, where you're saying now it's okay, I mean, open the source codes, let people build on top of each other, right? It'll all be a building block. Uh, so two questions there. One is in the context of EV, would it be easier if the platforms were shared, if there was an Android view to EV, number one. And number two is from pure brand marketing perspective, right? I mean, do you see collaboration as a good, strong pillar for brands to become more friends than enemies and work together? So, I mean, for example, say Pepsi and Money Heist, or Adidas and somebody and say Spotify, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are still easier ones because it's non-competitive. But could it get closer, hypothetically?
So the way I think about it is, and hearing your question, I think there are two aspects. One is collaboration for a business objective,
Yeah.
and there is collaboration to sort of make a, for want of a better term, a marketing campaign. Let me put it
Yeah.
that way,
Yeah.
right? You want association, you want some, positive vibes to
Values.
come to you,
Yeah.
values
Yeah.
to come to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see it in these two distinct
Yeah. Yeah.
zones. Now, I mean, coming to business, sure, there are, I think, what is the value of the platform, right? So, for example, again, let's cut back to, I know history will sort of sometimes shine a light on some of these things. When the ICE engines or say petrol vehicles were, the fuel is common, that's the platform, right? The makers of the vehicles were individual brands, and each of them said, I'm differentiated in this manner, I provide this function. But they all use the same fuel. Now, it could very
Yeah.
well be configured that each of them could have said, hey, you know what, you need to use fuel 1 here, fuel 2 there. But it didn't make sense because a customer is not going to go around finding different sort of fuel types just because it's added complexity, right? But then that required you to have the fuel distributors to do one kind of fuel. Now that would make sense for them if there was money there for them, and likewise for the refiner. So the chain has to make money, I think, number one. Similarly, I think while I think the Android, iOS, or all these platforms are big, it's important to always remember that Android makes its money in its own way. Otherwise, they won't be doing it. That's their motivation, right? So I think if you examine it with this principle, and there is some, and again, you have Android, you have other OSs also in place. It's not
Yeah.
all one, right?
Yeah.
So it is possible. Again, a lot of it could be done by legislation. It could happen, through collabs that on the business side. And I think there are a lot of interesting experiments that are happening.
Okay.
Tie-ups, etc. But it's very difficult to say which way it will go, because the basic infrastructure needs to be there. It needs to be widespread. Some of those, and again, it needs to make sense for everybody in the chain. So that's on
Yeah.
the business side.
Yeah.
I think the marketing one is can get a bit faddish, I feel, because I think at the end of the day, a brand wants to say something about itself, which is unique to itself. And when you have a collaboration, you will have two sets of uniqueness to come together, and then you try and build something new. It's not easy. It may not always work for both parties. It can work in some categories. Like I think if there is some, for example, music and apparel are, I can see some synergies. So I think there are a lot of conditions that need to come through, but it does sound a bit faddish to me.
So like more experimental. I mean, the brand still has to have its own core, its own differentiator, its own
Yeah,
unique
you can't rely
origin
on it
narrative.
completely. Yeah, you can't rely on that narrative to build your brand. I mean, at the end of the day, if you think of brand as a story, right?
Yeah.
There's a story I want to tell about myself as a brand. Let me think
Yeah.
of it that way.
Yeah.
So I need to get my story out to my customers. Now, when I collaborate with somebody, uh, by very nature, I need to make some concessions.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, then there's always that tug of war as to how much concession you will make and how much concession the other person will make.
Yeah.
So it's more art, I think. It's not a slam dunk that collaboration can build your brand, as opposed to the business side. You see, and I
Yeah.
think it's important not to confuse the two.
Yeah.
You may be
Yeah.
collaborating because there is
For
a
infra.
business
Yeah.
benefit for
Yeah.
infrastructure, for something. So, for example, Heinz could have a tie-up with a fast food brand. Heinz and McDonald's could tie up because there is a demand for ketchup in McDonald's, and Heinz gets a benefit and McDonald's gets a
Yeah.
benefit, and copious amounts get consumed, so therefore it makes
Yeah.
business sense as well.
Yeah. Or how in auto, for example, I mean, multi-jet engine is there in Maruti, Fiat, everywhere else, right? In cars, but it's largely produced by Fiat. So yeah, I get that. But probing on the collaboration and concession, how much concession to give and not to give part. And traditionally, the classical marketing theory is all about control, right? Whether it is prism or a brand key or whatever, you define till the last word and what the personality is and what is not, what values are and what's a discriminator. I mean, the brand book or the brand key is like the Bible, and the whole job of a brand manager or say a planner is to make sure everybody follows the guardrails and so on and so forth. And we talk on this platform, Narayan, to a lot of creators, right? We talk to platforms which are building influencers. We also talk to D2C brands who have, for the last, say, first 2-3 years, completely built their business on, say, influencer marketing plus some bit of performance, and not even touched the idea of what we classically feel the brand narrative being pushed out at all. And there's always a tug of a war or a conversation where the creators and the influencers are coming and saying, you know what, give me the objective that you want to achieve, and now leave me to tell the story. If you're going to come and tell me every 10 seconds what I'm supposed to do, I'm not going to deliver this for you. Right? And at the same time, I mean, a classical marketing guy saying, but hey, you know what? I have a tone of voice, I have a personality, I'm going to, and I'm used to, in the 30-second commercial, have a frame by frame objective in a very classical sense. So, how do we navigate this world? Because influencer marketing, social ideas which travel have also proven to be significant currency for a lot of brands and businesses, definitely in the D2C space. I mean, the proven use cases of brands have been scaled based on that. So, should marketing learn to let go of some of its so-called guardrails? Do we need to loosen ourselves a bit, or would that be harakiri?
No, but since, Dheeraj, if there are proven cases, then why should a marketer not be considering them? Okay, so
Yeah.
absolutely, I think so. First of all, I think a marketer has to make a set of choices, right? And those choices have to be, and choice of what to do. That's what I mean, right? It so you're right. I think a brand needs to tell its story. Do you want to be in full control of it? The question to be asked is, will it benefit you by telling your story in the most controllable manner? Number one.
Yeah.
I think one step before that also is, what is the product that is being sort of on offer? I think a lot of, so we don't ask the same question on the product part, do we? Right. The product is a very tight guardrail. So if you're
Yeah.
making a product or a service, now that is very, boundaries drawn. Often there is not too much collaboration, because then it becomes a new product, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you have a very strong product or a proposition, right, then I think like a graphic equalizer, you can be that's your strong suite. I think you can then think about, I need to reach out to a set of customers. I need to get their attention. I need to get their, I need to cut through to them. Is it worthwhile for me to tell a story, in fully controlled, or am I okay to, so for example, you have a very strong product, I would say, which is, say an Adidas shoe or a Nike shoe or a Puma shoe, right? So by definition, a Puma or an Adidas comes with a certain equity, certain certainty, and a certain glamour, right? The brand doesn't necessarily, and I am not the brand manager for any one of these things, so statutory warning. Please don't take it. Those guys know better. But I could make a case out saying ki everybody knows Adidas, but let's tie up with such and such influencer. Then the news that my latest range is out in stores gets by really fast. Right. But I think then it makes sense. But if you have a product that needs to be explained, it's a little bit more complicated. There is, there is some complexity to it, and it's totally new or something like that. You may wish to tell the story in your own direct way. So again, I think it's, as I said, I started off saying that the biggest thing, or the number one thing that a marketing person needs to do is choice. You cannot do everything.
Yeah.
So you need to be very clear about, the fact that it's all sort of finite. It's all sort of, there are only a few things that you can do. Whatever is best, you have to choose.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know whether that's answered your question, or have I been very theoretical?
You're saying the only parameter is a set of choices that you're making, and your objective, obviously. So there's no this way or that way, and that's your only grid.
There is no certainty. And I think,
Yeah.
I mean, again, one more thing I would say that I've learned is that, often the marketing decision of what to do on the marketing front is a very lonely one, if I can say that. Because at one level, you know very clearly that if you do the tried and tested, it's like ho-hum, right?
Yeah.
वो पहले किया हुआ है, you will not get noticed, etc. So there is a quest to say, let me do something different. There is also a fierce sort of fear of failure. And nowadays, in times that we live in, the cost of failure for a marketing person, I would say, has become very high. I read a joke the other day. Marketing is like stand-up comedy. Everybody thinks they can do it. And which is true. I mean, marketing has never been seen as a science. Marketing is actually been seen by the nice line or the advertising campaign, and then it is like, it's a bunch of guys who sitting in linen pajamas and thinking of clever stuff, right? That's the image, right? Wohi karte ho, look at advertising agencies; they all come in t-shirts and chappals and all of that, right? But the practitioners, like you, me, know that there is science to this. There is thinking to it. So I think there is a fear of failure amongst marketers, and that has become even sort of acute nowadays because we are now in times where I think marketing, they used to be saying that marketing is investment or cost, right? It was, I think, seen as a cost. And therefore, if you get it wrong, there is, penalties. Therefore, you want to be sure. And
Yeah.
and then then a lot of funny things happen.
Interesting. And in that context, then how do we look at effectiveness in today's times, right? I mean, classically, when I was younger and growing up, you would look at, I mean, which now a lot of people say vanity metrics as brand metrics, right? And then there was a fad of social media metrics and whopping social media impressions, and then you realize that that means nothing, in fact, right? Especially with a lot of click farms coming up and so on and so forth, right? And now, at least with a lot of our clients now, we are holding ourselves to say, okay, what you need 7 million downloads. We will design a campaign so that we are reasonably sure that there's outcome guarantee, as you're saying, that because you're investing huge amounts of money on, say, an IPL platform or any other platform. So even the responsibility on our heads as creators to say design a campaign for 10 million downloads or so on and so forth is huge, and we are holding ourselves to that. Though we still know that the linkages are vague. Right? It's at best ceteris paribus that we spent same amount of money during the same time on performance as well, and on top of that we spent X on this campaign, and therefore we got a Y result. So chances are that you've done a good job. I mean, that's the best imputation that we are able to get, unless you have some heavy AI-driven attribution matrix running at the back of it, which very few clients have. So how do we think of effectiveness in today's times, to your mind? I mean, does it have to link back to what you're moving on ground? What about vanity metrics, or is it a combination of all four now?
Oh, very tough. So first of all, it's very good that whatever campaign you do, I think it needs to be measured. You need to measure,
Yeah.
has it been successful or not. Now, if a client is extremely clear that, listen, I want downloads, and yeah, I can argue that you make sure that the app is download, and then I'll do the selling thereon. It's a great objective. So I think that sounds right. But I think pulling back, marketing ultimately has to impact business. And if it needs to do that, I think there are two metrics that should be very closely tracked in my experience. One is, are you in the consideration set of your customers? Now, you can spin it whichever way you want to. I'm just putting it in a very sort of broad, simplistic. And then when a customer thinks of this category, does he think of you? That's number one. If he doesn't, you need intervention. So therefore, maybe your campaign needs to get you into that, and that's something that you can measure in
Yeah.
whichever way. It is digital, it is you
Yeah.
go and ask the customer, whatever it is. I think the second thing related to this is, if you are in the consideration set, where are you in the pecking order? Right? Obviously, if you are number one, it's better. If you're number two, it's okay. But if you're in the consideration set, but you're an also ran, then I think you need to influence that. So you need to figure out a set of metrics that will influence this, and you can track it and the measurement, right? And it's quite possible. Now, having laid it out like this, it may take a while before some of these metrics change, depending on which category you are in. What's the competitive state, what is the customer decision making involved in it, etc., etc. Right? It may take some time, and you need to be patient about that. I think then another set of, and if you think that marketing needs to influence business, is what is your share of purchase at the end of it, and I think that needs to be there somewhere in the background, and any gap between these could indicate that you need to fix something else, your delivery mechanism, your availability, etc., etc. So I think so you need to figure out a set of metrics that help you to understand where you are in the minds of customers,
Yeah.
and your campaigns need to, and that could very well be that I want people to download my app. So currently only 5 people have my app. I want 10,000 to have it. No,
Yeah.
yes, you can measure it. That's fine. But the point is that in the next cycle, you need to say that, okay, now this, you want this 10,000 to become 30,000, 40,000, or you want this 10,000 to start using it more.
Yeah. Yeah. But what I hear you clearly saying is that link it back to the business KPIs, right? I mean, that's what you're saying. I mean, it's not a vanity thing. It has to finally deliver to whatever the
Yes.
business needs at that point in time are.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that's been my experience. Uh, to be very honest, look, I haven't worked in a, say, a startup situation where, there are money involved. So I don't know that part, and I'll be sort of humble enough to say so. So you could be dictated by that. I mean, look, objectives are objectives.
Yeah.
If your objective is to, sort of raise your next round of funding, then that's an objective. It's a very
Yeah.
legitimate business.
Yeah.
Business band ho jayega na. So I think
Then
it's
you're
fine.
building advertising for LinkedIn.
Yeah, then you could say that you could do advertising.
I would, no, this has been an amazing conversation on just rediscovering and discussing some of the very basic fundamentals of building a brand and business with you, Narayan. But I want to switch gears a bit and talk about you, right? So amongst the several categories that you've done, right, FMCG, entertainment, auto, uh, and it's a tough one. Which one have you enjoyed the most?
Okay. A list of questions didn't say enjoy. Okay, so look, I've enjoyed a lot of them. I think all of them have been very challenging. I think personally fulfilling and gratifying, if I was to use that lens, and it's a very,
Yeah.
it is, uh, they're all enjoyable. Let me put it that way. There is a certain thrill of, you go through what I would call the phases to say, oh, understanding what the problem is, then having a crack at it, having a, point of view. And as I said earlier in my conversation, I mean, a marketer needs to constantly, uh, y- my belief has always been, let me put it that way, that you can't find the answer often looking back. You can diagnose the problem looking back, but marketing is about looking forward. You need to come
Yes.
up with a solution which is refreshing, different, not been done before in some sense, right? Whether it is a piece of communication, whether it is a business strategy, category creation, all of this requires fresh thinking, right? You can look back, but ultimately the thinking has to be fresh. So you are getting into uncharted territory. So when I go through the process in each of these categories, it's the thrill of discovery, the thrill of knowing, the pit in the stomach feeling, saying, okay, if I do this, will it work or not? That has always sort of, I mean, that's what keeps me going, right? But personally fulfilling, I would say, would have been for me the Bonvita campaign back in 2013, where we did the Tayari Jeet Ki campaign, and
Yeah.
the reason for that was a couple of things. One is, I think, the context of the category. I mean, there was a lot of sort of functional. I have 40 vitamins in me. I have 23 vitamins in me in product, and that was becoming. It was like becoming an arms race, right?
Yeah.
And we went back and and what helped was that I was a parent myself, right? I had a young son, and my son was having the category. So a lot of things I looked at from that perspective. It wasn't like a academic, ki, oh, the customer is on a white sheet of paper, SECAB. I mean, the customer is my son, right?
Yeah.
And
At your home. Yeah.
at your home, and the dynamic between the child and the mother was being played out every day,
Yeah.
and as a parent, you saw the challenges, etc., and you understood the motivations, and you understood what was in, say, the mom's mind, right, at first hand, and you could link it back to things that were happening in the category. And then we took this stance, and it rewrote the narrative for the category for some time. And my biggest thrill was when I had a senior of mine from college, who was the head of marketing at GSK. He called me and said, "You know what? I wish I had done this campaign."
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was very fulfilling on all fronts, and that particular piece of we that was a global company, and I used to play this ad to people coming from the US. I mean, there was a universal reaction on seeing that strategy playing out. Let me put it that way. It wasn't a piece of communication. It was actually a thought.
Yeah.
And whether it was somebody in India, whether it was in America, whether it was from Southeast Asia, they all had exactly the same reaction, exactly the same takeout. So it traveled as well. That was my
Yeah.
point. I mean, finding that universal sort of unlock
Yes.
was, I think, most fulfilling for me.
Yeah, it was an amazing campaign, and the impact has been fantastic as well. Any leadership lessons or learnings or mantra that you've developed over a period of years, Narayan, that we can learn from, our listeners can learn from? What would they be?
I think you need to have I think a leader needs to be very humble. A leadership trait I have said is that you have to watch out for ego. You have to watch out for sort of I know it all. So I would say you have to be very humble. You have to be very curious, and you have to channelize your curiosity to understand motivations. Now, whether it is motivations of customers, you also have to understand motivations of your team members.
Yeah.
You have to understand, and I don't mean direct team members. You have to understand motivations of your agencies as well. So I think
Please.
those
Yeah.
two traits are what I think are people should not forget.
Yeah. No, very
Understand
useful.
motivations,
Yeah.
and be very curious.
Yeah, no, very useful. And what would you tell today's young marketers, right? Getting into business in very different times than what we got into the business, right? I mean, I definitely. I mean, I'm sure you had many years learning under the wings of senior people before you started doing uh, huge big things on your own. Today, empowerment is early, right, and so on and so forth. Lots going around. What would you tell young marketers out there listening to us right now?
Um, I think what I'd probably advise marketers is to have a curious mind and keep revisiting, your assumptions, because things are changing even faster than back in the day. So I think one is you need to be very curious. You need to be unafraid to re-examine. I think you need to persist, and you need to hold on to doing something for some period of time, not just sort of
Yeah,
see it as extremely short term. You need to balance something that you will do over a longer time frame versus something for immediate results.
yeah,
So I would say curiosity, risk taking, and I think the third thing I would say is reflect. See, yeah, there's a lot of marketing requires a lot of energy, and therefore, young people. Not to say that finance doesn't require energy, but
yeah,
it is there is a lot of you need fuel for it, right? And
yeah,
therefore, a lot of enthusiasm and energy is required. But people need to. There is value in reflection. There is value in just pausing to see what works, what doesn't, going deeper. So you need to make time for that as well, not just be on the treadmill constantly.
yeah. Fantastic. This has been an amazing conversation, Narayan. At this stage, we take a quick break and we turn the mic around to you, where you get to ask questions of me.
Okay, so Dheeraj, you've been asking me questions all this while. Now it's time to turn the table. So I have four questions for you. Okay. So one is you've been on the agency side. I'm your client, so to say. So let me ask, what is the secret to maintaining a healthy and successful brand and agency relationship?
I would say faith. I would say faith and trust, right? And I think that's something I've discovered in all partnerships, agency client partnership, or say strategy creative partnership within the agency. I think it's about having mutual faith, having mutual trust. Once you have that, I have seen that the hockey stick on thinking campaigns kick in amazingly, and when you don't have that, and that's also happening a lot in the market today. I mean, we have clients who are talking to three agencies simultaneously on one campaign, and then you see what finally came out of it, and it's quite subpar versus had they invested all their thing in one place. So having been through this business for so many years and all the experience, I think I would say that's one thing. Complete total investment, and this would look like harakiri to the new emerging models of advertising of having two agencies pitch for every project. But I have seen best work come out of faith.
Best work come out of faith. Okay. Hey, that's faith and trust.
Faith and trust.
But is there a time horizon to this, or is it
Of
faith
course
and
there
trust
is.
forever?
Of course. They say it's like as a client, if you call me and say, Dheeraj, you know what, so much depends on this, right? And we are in it together. We are putting everything in this, and we have to. I mean, the amount of responsibility it puts on your partner is huge, and they will make sure that they will not let you down. Right? Versus saying, you know what, Dheeraj, I'm talking to you, and then I'm talking to him also, and I'm talking to her also, and I'm figuring out which one I like best, and then you don't call me for 15 days and say, oh, I went with that one, yeah, see how's this looking. Because you've not invested. I mean, in my mind, best solutions. See, I'm not clever enough by myself, and I'm assuming a lot of us are not so clever by themselves. Some people are, but two people, three people coming together, there is no reason why you would fail, right? And when that investment happens on the table, I hate pitches, and we do very few pitches, because I tell clients that there is no way in 15 days I will get as smart about your category as you are. There is no way. I can't be that arrogant. But if you bring what you know, and if I bring what I know, and we fuse it together, there is no way anybody can defeat us.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, let me ask you the same question. Traditional versus new age marketing. What is your preference? Now you need to give me a clear answer. You can't whiffle and waffle like me. I'm the
No, I honestly, Narayan, feel it's all the same. There is no traditional, there is no new age. It's all one axis, right? It's all one axis. I mean, my whole theory is that today the brand, there's a narrative of the brand, and you have to be native to the platform. So brand narrative native to the platform is the theory I have. So there's one single narrative that the brand needs to tell, and that may not be a very sharply defined core, like how I grew up, writing three very choicest words in the circle at the core. But it's a broad narrative. And for example, to give you an example, I mean, I look at Spotify as a brand as saying music is the grease of life. Right now, somebody might turn around and say, but that's not inside. Where's the tension in it? I don't know. Right? But the idea that music is a grease of life is chaotic, music helps you hustle on. Now, the whole brand over a period of last, say, at least 10 or 15 odd campaigns over last 2 years have been built around this thought, right? Now, we take that narrative and we fuel it through television, we fuel it through social, we fuel it through tweets, we fuel it through ads, we fuel it through artist marketing, right? And so on and so forth. Right? So the way I see it, and therefore increasingly what we think a lot, is the journey. What is the journey of comms that the consumer or people out there will be exposed to? What do they see when they are watching television? What do they see when they are at the airport? What do they see when they are at point of sale? What do they see when they are doing a thumb roll on the reels? And how was the brand building the narrative surrounding the person across this? So I feel it's one axis, it's all the same, and therefore that also goes to how we are structuring the agency internally, right? I mean, within every team you have all abilities. You have the digital ability, you can't just have one or the other.
Yeah, okay, so you're saying it's a continuum.
Yeah.
And some parts are living in a more digital arena and some
Yeah.
are more non-digital arena, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So, you are now, you're leading not one but two agencies as of this moment, Dheeraj. So, well, yeah, many congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But tell me, if you had to, if I was to ask you, and we hear that the agency world is getting younger, and there are lots of young people and young talent coming in. So if I was to ask you, what are the sort of three leadership traits that you sort of rely on uh, to be successfully running an agency in today's times? What would they be?
Yeah. So one of the things that we talk about a lot nowadays, Narayan, is the idea of energy, right?
Hmm.
And the idea of positive energy, right?
Hmm.
It's very easy to wallow in negativity, right? It will. I mean, I can build while we are talking, I can build a huge narrative of negativity that everything's wrong with advertising, clients don't care, there's no relationship, everything's transactional, and in two seconds you say, oh my God, Dheeraj, you have such a tough life. Or I can swing it and I say, this is the best time of our lives.
Hmm.
If I have an idea, I can actually build a product around it. Bajaj V. If I have an idea, I can actually make world's largest anti-crash system. I can use AI, I can use technology, I can use data, I can, impact packaging, I can do collaborations. Look at we are living the best time. So how do you build positive energy? How do you infect that sense of energy across, right? Including clients, right? So when
Hmm.
we enter a client meeting, I tell my team that we carry our energy. Doesn't matter. If they're behind laptops, we'll get them out of laptops. If they are on mobile phone, we'll get them out of mobile phone. But it's our job to build. So energy is my single most important thing in the agency with people, the way we look at our own business, the way we look at our brand. I mean, if you don't love your brand, right? If you don't love your client, that will show through in the work that you do, right?
Hmm.
So energy is my first single most piece. Second is collaboration and team. And that's very important, Narayan, because in this business also there have been examples of building individual heroes, right? And a
Right.
lot of people have grown up aspiring to that. But to my mind, there hasn't been a bigger, more detrimental idea to advertising than that. Because it takes 100 people to create something sexy. It is
Hmm.
not one person's idea that makes the piece spectacular, right? Therefore, appreciation of that, investing in that, comes back to the idea of faith and
Hmm.
collaboration, right? The idea that you are there shoulder to shoulder, bunch of people creating that magic. That's the only way magic happens. Otherwise, you will fall short. I mean, you'll be at 60 out of 100. You will never be 80 out of 100 if you're not doing things together. So I would outline those two things: collaboration and energy.
Energy and collaboration. And it's quite interesting when you say that. I can, all listeners, I mean, this is something that Dheeraj does bring to the table. I mean, his positive energy is always is a key spike, as I call it, and I've always felt it across the last 10. How many years have we worked together? I think at least
Yeah,
10 years
I
now.
think, yeah, at
Yeah,
least,
so
yeah.
10 years, this is a universal trait. I mean, Dheeraj brings a lot of positive energy, and he's absolutely right. That has a very different, lends a very different environment in which to work in, and it's very healthy. Last question for you. Um, Work-life balance is, I think, very important nowadays. So, which way do you veer towards? I mean, is it work or is it life?
It's a very tough one, man. I wish I had found a answer to this. For me, it's a continuum again. I mean, I would be lying. I would be lying if I would tell you that when I wake up in the morning, I'm completely switched off and I'm just doing yoga and I'm at peace. I wake up and I have 10 things on my head, right? And I'm learning. I'm learning to build space for myself, to give priority to exercise, to health, and all of that because that's been important. And through the pandemic, right, it's been tough. I mean, a lot of people have spoken about mental health of young people, and we've spoken about that. Nobody's spoken about mental health of leaders. How do you lead a 500 people organization through teams for 2 years?
Right.
Right, so it's been tough, but to me it's all intertwined, right? I'm trying to find way for life and health within the work that we do. But for me, I get a lot of satisfaction from building the culture, building the agency, building work. I take a lot of pride in what comes out, and that inspires my personal life as well. So, for example, whenever, for example, I've been writing or doing this podcast, it's all come at very high intense moments in my
Hmm.
life. And when that energy level drops, suppose my work life is going weird and I'm not enjoying that. This goes for a toss as well.
Right.
So
No, that's a good
it is
lesson.
intertwined for me.
Here, I totally agree. I think it's a continuum.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
no, so that's interesting because there's been so much said about work life and balance, and I mean the notion of balance also is a lot of times questionable. I mean,
yeah,
it depends. It's so contextual, right? I mean, there are
yeah,
some days in which you'll. I mean, that's perfectly right. You can't
yeah,
compartmentalize it in
yeah.
this way. If something needs to be done, it needs to be done. It could be
Yeah.
personal, it could be professional.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
So
I know
yeah,
you are a runner and you are able to do all of that. So I'm also trying to take some time off for myself, for my health, and all of that. But then I'm sure while you're running, you're also thinking about uh, what needs to be done.
I mean, personally, and I know this was supposed to be rapid fire for you, but if I reflect back, see, the mind is also a muscle, right? And
Yeah.
it can get fatigued. So you need to give it some time off.
Yes.
So a
Yeah.
lot of things that whether it is exercise or whether it is something else are actually you're switching off.
Yes.
And sometimes it's good to completely switch off.
Yeah.
Now, for some people, it may work that you take 2 weeks off and you switch off everything, and that's enough. But for some of us, you need to switch off every day
Yeah.
for some time, and everyone needs to find their little
Yeah.
your little switching off moment is
Yeah.
the way I would look at it. And yeah, it's a continuum. Absolutely agree with you.
Thank you so much, and fantastic talking to you. It's been a
Yes, I
very
love this.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. So great. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Dheeraj.
yeah,
Thank you for this
yeah.
opportunity.
And the last bit, Narayan. So, for all those who are listening to us right now, and if they want to reach out to you with a comment or a question or asking for a job, what's the what's the handle? What's the preferred platform for you to be reached out at?
Okay, listen, I mean, if you want to reach out for a job, then you could write to me at my official email ID, which is narayans at bajajauto.co.in. I will direct you to through the right funnel and evaluate you. And of course, we will, do the due diligence totally. If you want to, however, reach out to me on non-work related matters. If you want to ask me any question which is more personal, when I say personal, I don't mean personal, but I'm saying not for a job, then yeah, I can be reached on my LinkedIn, Narayan Sundararaman, on LinkedIn. And yeah, those would be the two best ways I think to get in touch with me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Narayan.
Thank you, Dheeraj.